Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
The Future of Canada, United versus Separated, is a 5-part series. Listen to all 5 parts on TalkDigitalNetwork.com, HowStreet.com. This is part 3 of the 5-part series. We have 2 guests on today's show, Peter Downing, the founder of Wexit Canada online at wexitcanada.com, and Frank Vaughan. He was the People's Party of Canada candidate in Ontario for the 2019 federal election. He's online at frankvaughan.ca. Peter, Frank, welcome to the Future of Canada, United versus Separated.
Hey, thanks, sir.
Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. What are they, and are they good for the people of Canada, Peter?
I'll be candid. I haven't read the entire text of Agenda 2030 or Agenda 21. I am extremely a huge antipathy towards anything coming out of the UN, globalism, the phasing out of our energy industry, the control taxation. I mean, I look at Paris, the Paris Accord, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, like it's pretty much all the same thing. Regardless of the form it takes, it's leading us down the pathway to centralized global control of economy, land, labor, resources. And I don't think there's anything good coming out of it. I think that if, by the, I guess, the grace of God and the will of people, we're elected, the difference between us and other politicians is we actually will read the legislation that comes out before us, and to be able to report back and say, hey, this is what they're really talking about, and help people decide.
Yeah, as far as, and I would like to speak to Albertans here for a minute, just so that they understand where things are at. Agenda 2030 was one of the last things that Harper did was clear that. And Agenda 21 comes from Mulroney, which was another popular Quebecer that Alberta helped put in the chair. And the Paris Climate Treaty, a lot of those negotiations took place under Stephen Harper. What these agreements do is they surrender national sovereignty to the United Nations. They allow, just like the Compact for Global Migrations, they sell it to the public by saying that these agreements are non-binding, but it just so happens that the national governments are always passing laws that bring in the conditions that are set out under these agreements. And the reason, going back to the beginning of this conversation, when I asked about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, is this is a facet of the Agenda 2030, which seeks to move people off the land. They basically want you off the rural properties. They want to jam you into cities in the name of sustainable development. And what Agenda 2030 does is it infringes on the property rights that Canadians don't even have. We don't even have property rights in this country. But what property privileges we have, Agenda 2030 would subject them to United Nations authority and oversight. And all governments seem to support this encroachment on national sovereignty. So when it comes to Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, the Paris Climate Treaty, the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Independent Peoples or Indigenous Peoples, or any of the other agreements that we're talking about, anybody that cares about sovereignty, whether it's for Alberta or Canada, needs to start supporting politicians that want to get us out, that want to get us out of the UN, and that want to get us away from these agreements. We need to reclaim our national destiny, and these agreements take that away.
Is the UN a friend to the people of Canada, Peter?
No. No, I think for all the reasons that we've just been talking about, anything that's trying to impose on us the same conditions as, say, for instance, Saudi Arabia. For Saudi Arabia to be the head of like a human rights panel, it's a joke. It's kind of a mockery of human rights. So no. And I mean, maybe I look at it from a smaller perspective. If you look at South Africa, you look at what's happened there is you had the apartheid system, which we have right now in Canada. We do have a legalized apartheid with the Indian Act, control over First Nations lands, resources, that type of thing. And now it's kind of like, okay, you let people develop the land just enough, and now let's take away the land, the resources, capital, labor. And you've seen the horrible bloodshed that's going on in South Africa now with the white farmers being under attack and basically being forcibly taken property and land and resources from, which is just a lot more, it seems to be a lot more overt with the South African government. It seems to be a lot more covert with the United Nations. It was intended to be an institution that would stop future world wars. And maybe the way they're going about it is communism, global government, the exploitation of people and stripping away their freedoms, their individualities, and their self-determination is just anathema to the human condition. And for anybody who's read 1984, or for anybody who's read Brave New World, I definitely encourage people to do that, because we are seeing a lot of that, whether it was fiction or some people say it was a plan, but we are seeing those things play themselves out right now. And again, you have to support politicians who take a stand and say no.
Yeah, and the only thing I can add to that is, obviously, I think the UN is definitely not the friend of the free peoples of the earth. They have always been a proponent of global socialism. If you look at the people who were the driving force behind the United Nations in the beginning, most of them were communists in the first place. Comintern, which was the Communist International, disbanded and largely morphed itself into the United Nations. And I would argue, some say it's headquartered in New York because that was, the Americans were victorious after the war. They were the richest global power. There's a lot of those reasons at the surface, but I believe that the UN went to New York because they recognized that the United States was the most important country in the world to flip to socialism. They have the First Amendment, they've got the Second Amendment, and then they got the whole family of amendments that at least attempt to guarantee the rights and freedoms and property rights of individuals. And I know it's not perfect. I don't really want to get into that here. But if it wasn't for 1A and 2A, I think all of us would be worse off in the West, whether you're a Canadian or a European. I believe America is the bulwark that enables us to even hold to the illusion of our sovereignty and our freedom. The United Nations is desperate to eliminate that threat of a resurgence of American national character, and they're desperate to stop the spread of the contagion, and the contagion being a reawakening of national pride and the desire of people to reclaim their national sovereignty. The United Nations is an evil institution.
Is Canada under siege by the globalists, Peter?
Yeah. I think that again, all the treaties that we've talked about, I thank Frank for laying that out real well. I wasn't aware. But yeah, Justin Trudeau has said that we are the first post-national nation. He's talked about phasing out our industry, according to these climate dictates. And again, his predecessor, Stephen Harper, did. This is not good. And again, part of the Wexit movement, some will accuse us of being, too pro-American or too cozy to the Americans. But I think that the reality is that, as Frank pointed out, America has been a bulwark, and we don't know what's going to happen in the next election or subsequent election, especially with demographic patterns. Again, the liberal push to open borders for mass migration, and those people do vote. People who do come in, and it's not that they're bad people; it's that they feel a loyalty to whoever brought them in, and that's how they're going to vote generationally. So when we say that conservatives are never going to form government again in Canada, it also involves the external factors of mass migration to places like Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. And the Americans have that problem going on huge, especially with people able to just cross their land border from Mexico. Texas is even becoming a blue state. So these are huge problems right now that I think right now, I know Frank disagrees, working in closer cooperation with the Americans as they are right now is not necessarily a bad thing. And if we have the highest concentration of conservative, freedom-loving, small government-minded people in Western Canada, now's the time for us to take advantage of that, because Trudeau is resettling massive immigrant populations in places like Clare's home, Alberta. Tiny little places. And if you see the craziness that goes on in a place like Brooks, Alberta. And again, I'm going to even stop saying and qualifying that we're not anti-immigrant, because it's a false thing. They're trying to bring in 600,000 migrants into Canada this year. There aren't 600,000 empty jobs right now. We have so much joblessness and unemployment right now that this is nonsense. They're bringing in a dependent population that will vote Liberal for generations and generations to come as soon as they get their citizenship. This is bad.
Frank,
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead,
Sorry.
Frank.
Okay. Globalism. So globalism is a decision. It's a collective consciousness, for lack of a better term. There are a lot of people, Chrystia Freeland, Stephen Harper, Michelle Rempel, even many other politicians in the Canadian environment, that subscribe to this. It's like a club med of internationalism, and that defines globalism. It's not like you can. The mistake that people often make is they want to point at one person. They want to point at the Rothschilds, or they want to point at George Soros, and it's not. It's not those people. They are part of that mindset, but it's a mentality. It's a mentality of internationalism and a lack of national sovereignty. And to say we're under siege is it's an understatement. We're not under siege. They've already broken through the walls. They've stormed the ramparts. And at this stage, we're basically in the last ditch fight. And if we don't get our act together, and I mean together as a nation, we're going to succumb either together, or we're going to succumb separately in a balkanized environment. The mass immigration stuff, it's very interesting, because the Trudeau government, along with the Conservative Party of Canada, they virtue signal about the climate, and that they think that carbon is driving environmental degradation, and Alberta oil is bad, and all this other stuff. That doesn't fit with their desire to see 100 million people in this country by the turn of the century. I've extrapolated this. When you take Google Earth and you look at Vancouver, you look at the Fraser Valley, or you look at Toronto, or you look at all these other urban centers, and then you extrapolate what happens when you triple the population. And I can't think of a better way to describe environmental degradation than just jamming people in for the sake of jamming people in. And it's interesting because, Trudeau is definitely bringing in the immigration, but Quebec is a model for every other province in this regard. They have said, no, we're not going to adhere to this. We're going to pick the immigrants that we bring in. They have to share our values, and it just so happens that European immigrants of all ethnic backgrounds happen to share our values, so we're going to focus our efforts there. And the federal government lays down. I would assert that if Alberta elected a government that wanted to assert their provincial rights, they could do the exact same thing. There's nothing stopping Jason Kenney from dictating terms when it comes to immigration. And for that matter, there's nothing stopping Doug Ford from dictating terms when it comes to immigration. The only other thing I'd like to maybe push back on just a little bit, I understand the thinking, but it's my experience that immigrant communities are far more conservative than people give them credit for. They need an actual conservative champion.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and that's if they had that conservative champion, those immigrant communities would vote for that champion, because the Liberals are actually, in their pursuit of immigration from some of the most conservative, hate using the word conservative, but from some of the most backwards societies on the planet, they're actually bringing in some of the most fundamentalist conservatives that you could possibly get. And by that I'm using a bad definition of conservatism, but I don't really know how else to describe it. These are very
talk about family, faith, family values,
correct,
hard work, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And if they had a voice that represented them, I was at a dinner. I won't talk for long about this, but I was at it was a wedding actually. It was an Indian wedding, and it was a girl. I guess you would call an old stock Canadian, and she was marrying a new stock Indian man. And it was interesting because the Indian side of the room was traditional family, a man and a woman with children running around, and what you would call old stock Canadian side of the room was broken families, divorcees. The chairs were empty because you could actually see the visible decline in the birth rate. You could actually see the visible effects of all these years of progressivism that we have subscribed to. And so later on, after the dinner, I was in a garage and we were drinking some beers and smoking some cigars and stuff, and I was talking to the Indian family, for lack of a better term. And we were joking around, we were having a great time, and they said, we don't get you guys. We don't understand that if the government tried to dictate the kinds of progressivism that you tolerate on us, we would reject it. We wouldn't allow it to happen. In places where we come from, we get shot for thinking out loud. We suffer under oppression. And then we get here, and you people allow yourselves to be repressed without any threat of violence. You silence yourself because of political correctness. It doesn't make any sense. And the more I talked and had this conversation, and this is just one conversation of many, the more I realized that these people are looking for a champion too. They're looking for a conservative champion, and there's not one on the horizon.
Is human trafficking prevalent in Canada, Peter?
Yes. Last years of doing police work, I ran across that quite a bit. Domestic human trafficking of girls and women who get into bad situations and get taken advantage of by a boyfriend or a friend or whomever. But yeah, the open borders crisis really accentuates that. And I think that's one of the best reasons to not have open borders, is that you control who's coming in and who's coming out, because women, girls, children are getting shipped all over the place, and there isn't an effective response to it. The open borders only makes it worse.
Yeah, the human trafficking thing is becoming, and Peter would probably know better than I would because he's worked with it, but in more recent years it's becoming a greater and greater problem, and a lot of the times the media is hiding key details, and people don't want to talk about the cultural influence when you bring in cultures with different value sets than the ones that we espouse at the national level, the ones that we say that we believe in. Bring those cultures into the country, and then you refuse to talk about problems. You're breeding a situation that's only going to encourage it. A friend of mine from, let's just say, North Africa, because I don't want to out the guy, was telling me about the family dynamics in the region that he comes from, and basically it's the women exist to birth males. If they birth a female, it's looked as a failure. The family is everything, and you will rob and steal your way to further your family. There's absolutely no common shared value set between families outside of the family unit. And the value sets that are inside the family unit are very patriarchal, very dominion-based. And then you look around the world at the varying countries, whether it's Saudi Arabia or the Iran under the Ayatollahs or whatever. We're talking about regimes that horribly oppress their women and oppress their peoples. And we're constantly told, whether it's by the conservatives or the liberals, that all cultures are created equal and that all human beings are equal and share some sort of inherent human value set. And I'm here to tell you that human value set isn't shared. It's a Western creation. and it hasn't existed for very long, and we're letting it go in blindness. So until we actually stand up for our culture, which is a culture of tolerance and a culture of equality, and not the equality that they're talking about at the federal level, but like genuine equality. Everybody's got a fair shot. No special favors for anybody. Until we stand up for these values, and start talking about the fact that not all cultures are created equally, these problems that we're talking about right now only expand and get worse.
Do you think Canada has a pedophile problem? Peter?
Yeah, we launched a billboard in June, and actually it was on the back end of the rumor of Trudeau doing a sweeping gun ban, and we asked the question, is Trudeau leading us to civil war? We got a lot of backlash from the media for that, but one of the things we put up there, we put socialism, communism, carbon tax. We put out kind of all the things that people are talking about online. And we put normalizing pedophilia. And people said, is Trudeau normalizing pedophilia? And I said, well, it is a concern that the Trudeau Foundation has a known pedophile symbol on their annual report in 2015-2016. But no, it's definitely a broader general problem, one that seems to be more embraced by the political left. The stuff that's getting taught in schools. I've got a school-age son, and he's coming back telling me the stuff that they're teaching them in school. And celebrating child drag queens, and it's insane and disgusting. In 2017, I was on the board of a group called Parents for Choice in Education in Alberta, and we came across on the Government of Alberta official GSA, Gay Straight Alliance website, was outright explicit sexual content geared towards, and it said this is a website for K to 12. That means 5 to 17-year-olds are being actively marketed this stuff. And when we put in FOIP requests for police investigation, nobody wants to touch it. Nobody wants to touch it because they're afraid of being branded as being anti-gay or being homophobes. And again, whether it's folks I've served with in the Army, whether it's in the police, whether it's in politics, and they're all, they have a sexual orientation towards, they're gay. They don't tolerate that either. So it's more of an institutional thing that we're seeing with the political left. I mean, people on the political right can be pedophiles as well. But we're definitely seeing that advance. And the reality, if you go back to the Communist Manifesto, is the destruction of the family unit, the breakdown of Christian values, family values that we've had for such a long time that has allowed us to be the best society in the world up until, arguably, until this point. And we're seeing the decline, we're seeing the degeneration working in overdrive.
Yeah, so Canada absolutely has a pedophile problem. As I alluded to, and I'm really actually glad you asked this question because it's something I would love to talk about right now. This isn't a plug for me because I couldn't give a damn who follows me. But if people were to find my Twitter account, if you go to frankvaughan.ca and click the Twitter link and go there and look at what happened yesterday, I went down a rabbit hole. I knew it existed, but I've never gone down the rabbit hole, and that is people who are openly celebrating pedophilia and working for its normalization, and they are being allowed to thrive online. And the psychologists who themselves identify as liberals, who say that pedophilia needs to be normalized, that pedophiles need to work with children's protections groups. We don't help children by excluding pedophiles from the conversation. We need to bring them in because only pedophiles know how to protect kids. The number one thing we know about pedophilia is that pedophiles will infiltrate anything that allows them to get close to kids. And anybody who knows anything about this crisis, and I know quite a bit about it. I'm not a victim myself, but I had a wake-up call years ago where I started realizing that so many people in my immediate circle were raped as children. And I started expanding on that knowledge and found out that there are victims everywhere. They infiltrate things like Boy Scouts. They will infiltrate things like drag queen story time. They will infiltrate groups that openly accept these things. And the other thing that they're doing, which is a subset of this pedophile problem, because our legal system is a joke. I know one person that was raped constantly for a decade of her life. and this guy never served a day in jail. He got released to reoffend. They're all over the place, and they have the legal system on their side. And what we are doing with this drag queen, CBC putting out shows that celebrate child drag queens. We've got Desmond, the amazing Desmond, who goes to gay bars and dances for money in drag, and he's 10 years old. What they are doing, and the other part of it is saying that a kid who is not even out of puberty, sometimes not even in puberty, can undergo hormone therapy to quote unquote
the new sterilization. It's the new sterilization.
It's total sterilization. It's total destruction. But the courts now, including BC, I'll tell you this, Peter, if you separate, you're taking southern BC with you. We don't want it. The courts have decided that a child has sovereignty over the decision to make a sex change. And so if you can choose, if a kid can choose to have a sex change, if a kid can choose to be sterile,
they're typically autistic kids.
They can consent to sex. This is my point. This is where they're going with this. They're moving this down. They're celebrating the normalization of child drag queens, and it's coming, folks. Mark it down on the calendar, January 15th. I told you. They're going to say that if a child can consent to a sex change and they have sovereignty there, they can consent to sex, and the next thing you know, you're going to have 60-year-old men and 10-year-old boys walking down the street hand in hand. That's where these sickos are going with it. And you know what? As a final point, this is not just the fault of our politicians. This is not just the fault of our teachers. My kids, God willing, will never go near a public school because it's disgusting. I think a good parent at this stage pulls their kids out of school and does what they can, if they can do it within their means, would pull their kids out of school and homeschool them. Because what is being taught now, this gender madness, is absolutely going to destroy a generation. It already is. These kids are filled with regret. It's a failure of the public. When I found this rabbit hole last night, when I was looking at this doctor who's openly advocating for pedophiles, and then I found out that his followers are people who are proud of being pedophiles, who want to walk in the light, who want to be in public, and they want to be recognized. I made a tweet to Twitter Canada. I made a tweet I made a tweet to everybody I could possibly make, and I'm like, are you aware that there are pedophiles operating on your platform in the open? And I said, people, I never ask you to retweet. I never ask you to propagate my message. But this time I'm asking. And by morning, I only had 80 retweets. That's pathetic. That's a failure of the people. I got 6,000 followers on Twitter, and only 80 would touch that. That means they're afraid of the social ostracism. People, you gotta find your courage. You're losing your children. You're losing your control. We want to talk about forming countries. We have to protect our friggin' kids first. This is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in 3 years of advocacy. These pedos are online promoting themselves. And the court system just lets them walk. We put people in jail for simple pot possessions, but we let these people walk. And we put them in a sexual offender database, but their rights are guaranteed when they're out in the public. This is wrong. If I had it my way, I would do everything I could to reinstitute capital punishment for anybody who's ever abused a kid. That's the only way to deal with it. We have a problem.
We'll have more with Peter Downing and Frank Vaughan right after the break.
Cypress Development Corp is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Peter Downing from Wexit and Frank Vaughan, a Federalist who ran for the People's Party of Canada in Ontario. Are the immigration floodgates being open to millions of newcomers? Peter?
No. 600,000 this coming year. And that's just the ones the governments are the government has set with their new immigration target, 600,000. So I think Germany peaked at 1 million, and I think that Canada has already said they're going the same way.
Frank?
Yeah, absolutely. It's official government policy now. They have signed the Global Compact on Migrations. In spite of the virtue signaling, both the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party support immigration platforms that are Global Compact on Migrations compliant. What they are trying to do is socially engineer the destruction of national identity and do it through opening the floodgates and not allowing national governments to put conditions on immigration, not allowing to put conditions on the numbers and the flows. People talk about the housing crisis. I ran into this during the election a lot. No politician actually wants to touch the elephant in the room, and that is the reason that land values in Vancouver and Toronto are so high, and the reason they're rising around the country is because there's a lack of housing, and there's such an increase in demand. A lot of the times, what happens is we bring the richest of the world into the country, and they use themselves as an anchor to finance bringing in their family and their friends, and they finance them into place. At the same time as we have these so-called sustainable development goals where we're not allowed to build the housing, we're not allowed to build adequate housing or secure the supply of housing that would need, and the infrastructure supply that we would need to actually properly deal with these flows. I can't see an outcome or a desired outcome on the part of the mass immigration enthusiasts that isn't essentially national degradation, the disintegration of the viability of Canada as a nation state. Because it's not just cultural, it's also economic, and nobody wants to answer the economic question. When you bring this many people in and you don't supply adequate housing, by the private sector, by the way, not public housing, because that's another way they sell it. We need more public housing. We got all these immigrants coming in, we got nowhere to put them. Homeless crisis in Toronto. Canada has one of the fastest, if not the fastest, growing homeless rates in the country. And their answer is, we need more public funding. We need more public housing. It's ludicrous. We need to slow immigration for national integrity reasons. We need to slow immigration from everywhere for national integrity reasons. And if we're going to do immigration, it has to be economically viable. We have to have a place to put them. We have to have a place to make sure the infrastructure is there so that it doesn't destroy the viability of the cities. I mean, anybody that drives through Toronto every day has to struggle with wanting to kill somebody because of the clog in the arteries of the roads. And I'm speaking metaphorically, of course. It's destructive. What they're doing is destructive. And it's also contrary to their claims of being concerned about the environment, concerned about carbon emissions. The worst way that Canada can increase its carbon emissions, if that's really a concern of yours, is to flood the country with immigrants. Because human beings, by their own admission, I'm sorry, I'll finish up on this. When my son was born, I go to a small town market, and I'm walking around, and there's people there that know me and whatever. They're coming up and they're congratulating me, and this one person, an NDP person, comes up to me and they say, how many kids do you plan to have? And I said, as many as I can. As many as the good Lord wants to give. That's how many kids I want. And they're just like, oh, that's a shame. And I'm like, why is that a shame? Well, the carbon footprint of kids, we got to lower the population. And they gave me the spiel. At the same time, this is the establishment spiel. At the same time as they want to flood the country with hundreds of thousands of immigrants to deal with the decline in birth rates. This is weird. We're in weird territory.
It's, the irony always gets lost on me. So it's almost like you just want to say, well, why don't you kill yourself?
We'll have more with Peter Downing and Frank Vaughan right after this.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Peter Downing and Frank Vaughan. Peter, of course, the founder of Wexit. Frank Vaughan, a Federalist who ran for the People's Party of Canada in Ontario. Peter, is there a push by the Trudeau government to take away people's guns?
Yes, 100%. The fellow who wrote our firearms policy for Wexit, a man by the name of Todd Brown. He's the executive director for the Firearms Institute for Rational Education. And he really talks, he opened my eyes as to how everything within the Firearms Act is meant to lead towards confiscation. But yeah, Mr. Trudeau's already said, or through Bill Blair, that they're going to do an order in council to take away military-style assault rifles, which they've never defined. Myself, having served in the military, military fully automatic or only automatic belt-fed firearms are not available to the public. Nobody sells them. So, again, you talk about the ability to enforce this communist, globalist dystopia. The only way that you can do it effectively is to be able to take away people's firearms.
Yeah, and so it's, from my perspective, it's obvious that that's what they want to do. They every time there's a surge in crime, and it's interesting because, you know, I remember reading a story this summer about going down the 401, which is the principal highway in Ontario. There were two cars that were chasing each other, and they were firing handguns back and forth, and the calls for more gun control were immediate in the wake of this shooting on the 401, and I thought to myself, those handguns are already illegal in that context. You can't take your handgun anywhere except the range, and shooting at people on the highway is already pretty freaking illegal. I'm not really sure how new laws are going to change that situation. And when it comes to what they define as what Peter was saying about military and assault rifles, what they say those are, there's documents available out there in the wake of, I believe it was in the wake of Policy Vaughan, where the government went through picture books, and they pointed out the scary ones, and that's how they came up with the prohibited list and the restricted list, by pictures, what looks scary and what didn't look scary. Which is why a person can buy a non-restricted AR-12 that shoots .308, which is a big round for anybody that understands guns. And we can buy that in a non-restricted format, but we can't buy an AR-15, which shoots .556. It makes no sense. It's blatant that they want guns out of the hands of the lawful. Literally, Canadian gun owners are the best Canadians. We're vetted. We're screened every single day. We can't have criminal records. We can't even have interdictions. If I get in a fight at the bar and the police are involved and they break it up, I'm going to get a call from the Canadian Firearms Office and I might lose my guns. There's zero impact. There's a fellow by the name of Rod Giltaki and the CCFR who are doing the most outstanding work right now when it comes to research on this file. They have totally deconstructed the government narrative, and I can only wish that their work would get a wider audience, because they don't just do it on a verbal level. They have researchers that they have deployed to dig into the so-called science of gun control leads to positive outcomes, and they have destroyed it. They have destroyed every single pillar of the foundation of the gun confiscation argument. I can't recommend looking at their work enough. They absolutely want the guns, and it's not for public safety. It's not based on function. It's not going to lead to desirable outcomes. And if it's anything like New Zealand, the vast majority of the population won't comply. I think what's going to happen is they're going to have this. They're going to introduce their legislation or their order in council, whatever way they do it, and they're going to have an amnesty which pushes it back past the next election. And they're going to try and win an election, and then that'll really come down. So hopefully the next government can come along and get rid of it. The last time the Liberals tried this, we got Harper in, and though I'm not a champion of Stephen Harper, because he, you know, on his rise to power, he promised to repeal the Firearms Act and made all these promises on his rise to power, and then when he got there, the only thing he did was get rid of the long gun registry, but we still had these ridiculous rules when it came to transport and magazine limitations. And by the way, I want to remind people, it was Kim Campbell, the Conservative, that put the pins in your magazines so that you can't have fun at the range anymore, because fun is a danger.
Well, she called me Hitler. She called me Hitler in her Wexit, her response to Wexit, so I was proud of that.
Well, I mean, everybody's literally Hitler, right? They don't even know what the word literally means. They don't even know what the word literally means. They use it. Literally Hitler. Am I? Am I? Have you looked up the definition of that word? Yeah, to stop.
Thank you very much for being on the show, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good. I enjoyed it.
Listen to part 4 of this interview with Peter Downing from Wexit Canada and Frank Vaughan from frankvaughan.ca online at talkdigitalnetwork.com, howstreet.com. If you have any questions for our guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.